Álvaro, thank you so much for joining us here at the Financing for Development Conference in Sevilla, Spain.
Thank you for having me.
So how is everything going? How has the week been for you? We're Wednesday, so we're, almost about halfway through. What have been kind of the main highlights so far? How's it going?
Well, I think this is a very important event. As you know, it happens every decade. So we have a very good text. We already had a very good text in Addis Ababa. So I think the most important signal for all of us is that the international community, the majority of the international community has come together under certain principles, certain values, certain types of investments that hopefully will address many of the global public challenges we have, whether it's related to poverty, to hunger, inequality, obviously climate change. So at least that development still matters and that a lot of these investments can unlock opportunities for people.
Yeah, I mean, it's coming at a really fascinating, challenging, complicated time for development right now. There's pressing challenges over the world. We're seeing a decline in ODA, official development assistance. We're also seeing conflict across the world. And a lot of it touches the sector that IFAD works in, right? Agriculture, food. Tell me a little bit about that, both in terms of the context of what you work on, agriculture, food systems, food security, and how the trends going on affect you.
Well, thank you. Actually, as you said, we still, I would say, have for a very good number of decades have a sector that has underinvested in food systems, agriculture, goes beyond how food is produced, also how it's distributed, how it's stored. And there's hundreds of millions of people in many of the economies, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, which basically their income, their lives depend on it. So what we're seeing is that this has been underinvested for a long time. This has had consequences in terms of forced migration, in many cases of really conflict and choices that were very, very difficult for a lot of hundreds of millions of people. What we're seeing currently is that we are not discussing anymore about inequality. We seem not to discuss anymore about the 1 in 10 people that are hungry or in extreme poverty. And I think it's important that at a moment where, as you said, many governments in the least developed countries do not have many choices because they are paying a lot of their tax revenues into interest of their debt, that we find ways that whatever the overall amount is, we manage to really catalyze other actors, where we're talking about remittances, local private sector, foreign direct influence. There needs to be economic opportunities and there needs to be ways of really having these people have a decent source of income or decent living condition. I would be very happy, for example, to delve a little bit more on some of the mechanisms we have been putting together, whether it's on the private sector, local private sector, whether it's on remittances. But I think this conference is about finding solutions and instruments and not just only about the text. So the signal has been strong from the governments, but now it's important that we put it into action.
Right. And I definitely want to dig into some of those with you. I know you've announced quite a few interesting initiatives here throughout this week in Sevilla. Before we get there, though, I did just want to address, kind of the fact that the U.S. is not here, right? There's this elephant in the room or elephant not in the room, I guess we've been saying, when it comes to commitment to the Sevilla compromise or the commitment, and also IFAD itself, right? So in the president's budget, which is not yet finalized, it needs to go through Congress, but IFAD was zeroed out. So can you just talk to me a little bit about that? Kind of what was the reaction there? And how is the agency now looking to fill that gap?
So for us, we are a financial institution. So actually, we also issue bonds. We have other means of really going through it. We are not just a donor-dependent or projectized type of institution. So that certainly helps. During the first Trump administration, actually, we also were zeroed out, but we managed through Congress to also have a number of support. I think we have a wide bipartisan support, investing in the root causes of, I would say, of food insecurity and of hunger and poverty. I think it has wide support, not only in the US, but also across other countries. What we've seen since the last replenishment, which was already difficult, even though it was historic for IFAD, is that more and more countries have to choose where they will be investing their limited amount of funding. For us, in general, this has meant that we are usually at the top of the priorities or top of the scale because of our effectiveness and also because of the type of impact we bring. So for ourselves, we're still quite positive and constructive, but it's clear that the co-financing, a lot of the local governments, a lot of the, I would say, other bilateral actors with whom we partner, is going to be more challenging. So we're also doubling down with the national development banks, with the multilateral development banks, to make sure that at the end, the co-financing and the financing is really channeled to this first mile, which is where poverty is located in the rural areas, and which financing a lot of this, I would say, areas of food systems.
Right. Yeah, I believe last time we spoke, which was, something like 8 months ago, we had a conversation, Alvaro, and the headline of my story ended up being, with aid declining, how is this one agency able to break its own financing record? So now you have even more at stake, but we'll see what happens. And I think a lot of that will be, like you said, based on different ways, innovative ways to figure out financing. You launched a program this week about remittances, and I want to talk to you a little bit about that, because remittances, as we know, is a massive form of money coming in and cash flow coming into developing and emerging economies. Tell me a little bit about that initiative and what you plan to do.
Thank you. Yeah, so we actually launched with the European Commission a program for the time being in 3 countries, which have a big share of their GDP comes in the form of remittances: Honduras, Pakistan, and Senegal. And the issue is, we know the overall size. We always talk about the big sizes. But I think conversation needs to go further. How to really instrumentalize and make it happen with the people on the ground. So if we talk about the general figures, we know remittances is around 680 billion per year. If you compare it with ODA, which is between 200 to 150, depending where you add refugees, not billion per year, or whether you talk about agriculture, which is 10, 12 billion per year, the sizes are very different. We know a lot of those remittances go into paying school fees, paying for certain purchases of even solar energy. Well, for a lot of small things in villages, in communities, but there needs to be also opportunities to actually translate it into investments and into returns also for their own savings, so that they don't have to just consume everything, but actually also be able to build capital for the future. So what we put together was a way of using those sources or streams of income as a collateral for microfinance institutions, for them to connect many of these, I would say, recipients to other companies to purchase seeds, to purchase solar energy, to purchase other means that will also help them in the future, adapting especially to some of the climate shocks. So it can very much serve as a collateral that will help them also on getting access to credit and continue investing. So it's a way of really not only purchasing the short term, but building for the long term and connecting all of these different actors and brokers. I think that's where IFAD is, I would say, it's our competitive advantage, our niche, and where we are very good at of connecting and brokering all of these local financial institutions with the communities and actually with the bigger money.
And what was the reception like when that was announced?
Well, I think it has been very positively seen. Today I will be meeting with the Minister of Finance of Pakistan and also discussing. They have an excellent program in the country, but we need to make sure that it's connected also with the communities. And that's where I think we can also support a lot of the investments and development strategies of the countries themselves. At the end, when we talk about sustainable development, it's not about the North donors just saying, but actually what needs to happen or not, but the interests and the priorities of the recipient countries and the borrowing countries. I mean, what are their priorities where they think we should be investing together? And I think this is the same goes with the communities. It cannot stop just at the government level. We need to see what are the needs of the communities. In many of our programs and investments that we have, the communities themselves also support a lot of that design and prioritize some of the outcomes. For example, I remember in Bolivia, when I was in the Altiplano, actually, we provide them just with the funding, and they were the ones who were saying what would be the priority, what would be the best use of the money for the communities. And at the end, that's a way also many times of having the best outcome for the communities themselves.
Right. So it's, again, this kind of different way of looking at development. And I think that's part of what IFAD does in a lot of ways, right? They're figuring out how to leverage different resources. Tell me more about just kind of what you're hearing in that regard at this conference. Are you hearing perhaps different things than you did 10 years ago, more folks going toward these kind of different styles or approaches? I feel like this is something that I'm kind of hearing in terms of, okay, it's clearly a different world, right? Where ODA is declining in a way it never has before. So what next? I guess I would like to hear the same from you. What are your...
So I think at least my sense or my feeling talking to many partners is that there's a sense of unity, of we need to come together. We need to find solutions together. A number of years ago, if we just take the MDBs, there was not that united way of moving forward and of having where is procurement, where is co-investments, the willingness at the top of making it happen. Now we are also part of that group, even though we are not an MDB, but even on joint pipeline, joint designs, joint country platform, that is happening, I would say, after talking a lot about it on the ground. So we just had today an event, for example, with the president of the Inter-American Development Bank, the Islamic Development Bank, EIB was there, African Development Bank, and there's this sense of coming together. In our case, obviously, having mostly our niche in rural areas, which many times translates into small-scale farming. We are recognized and such. And we're bringing a lot of, for example, let me put you another example, AIIB invests, we know, in the bigger infrastructure. Now we have a number of programs with them where actually the investments are also trickling down into the communities by linking their expertise and our expertise. So there's a real willingness to come together. With IFC, we have had a number of deals also in the private sector. Yesterday I was with EBRD with a deal, and there's the willingness now that they're coming into sub-Saharan Africa to look at co-investments in the agri-food system. So the willingness is there, and I think by leveraging on our expertise, we will come to a better outcome, independently of whether it's this donor or there's more or less financing. Because at the end of the day, even among ourselves, I mean, it's not about just filling the gaps. It's about making sure once more that we create the ecosystem with the governments, but that we bring also the local private sector in whatever form, in our case through agri-SMEs, in other cases with bigger infrastructure. But I think that's where we need to focus on how to make it happen. We cannot continue just talking or crying about where there's more or less financing. I think we need to really move forward. And the community, there's this sense of unity of moving forward.
Yeah, and you mentioned, of course, the private sector, which is a massive topic at this conference. Tell me a little bit more about the appetite that you're seeing within the private sector. And I would also be curious what you just mentioned, small and medium local private sector companies.
Well, for us, everything is about local, especially agri-SMEs, medium, small, and micro enterprises. There's obviously a capillarity. It's very difficult to really invest in many of them. It can be done through many ways. It can be direct to bigger sizes or bigger tickets. It can be through platforms, through funds. But these are the vehicles and the solutions that we need to find. In the case of IFAD, currently, in all our country programs, in our investment programs, all of the country directors, all of the teams are looking into entry points or exit points for the private sector to take over when we are not there anymore. I think this is a change in mindset. We recognize that our sector is especially challenging. We're talking about the bigger infrastructure, the bigger returns. At the same time, it is where it's most needed. I think this change of mindset, of culture, of mentality, we are seeing the IFCs, the EBRDs, which before were more on the trade finance and bigger tickets, to also willing to co-invest and come here into this sector, which is probably the most challenging at that level of aggregation. And I think that's the important part, that the willingness to really not just keep it at the macro level, but come to the community level and to the impact on the people that are suffering poverty or hunger is there. Now, obviously, we need to put together the instruments and the vehicles that will make it happen so that the local private sector can also come into this type of bankable deals.
Yeah, that makes sense. One last question for you, Álvaro, which is, at the end of this week, we'll have 4 days, we'll have 38 pages in the outcome document. What do you think is one thing or two things, if you must, that we can do as a global community to really drive forward what's set out in this commitment document?
I think, in terms of the community, there's a number of, I would say, solutions that have been put forward. One that I'm especially keen to continue supporting, especially the Inter-American Development Bank and African Development Bank, is SDR as hybrid capital. That can clearly bring hundreds of billions and be multiplied on leverage. We also are a potential recipient. We can leverage. We are also, our balance sheet is in SDR. I think that's something without having a big cost or any cost almost for any of the donors that can be multiplied and leveraged, and we will be talking about hundreds of billions. We know that unfortunately, we have not managed to have 5 investors who can provide the liquidity to make it happen. We have gotten only to 3, but I think there's an opportunity for member states and donor countries to think on ways of making it happen. That's a very simple idea. It's very technical, but we can bring hundreds of billions. Apart from that, it's very clear once more, whether it's guarantees, whether it's concessional finance being an instrument of de-risking or blending, but that needs to be the area where many of these institutions like ourselves need to focus on. We cannot be just filling the gaps or attending the very short-term needs or focusing only on the big infrastructure. We need to really get to where the impact is biggest, and that for us, in our case, is rural areas.
And just to break that down a little bit, that first portion that you were just talking about is SDRs are special drawing rights, right? So this international reserve asset that I guess can be banked for a hard currency. I know that there's a clause in the outcome document that talks about a playbook, right, for these special drawing rights. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, or how you hope or see that being brought to the fore?
Well, I think at the end it's a matter of political will that will translate into technical will. I think it can happen. I think there has been a big leadership by the IMF on this, but we need also the support of member states to make it happen. It's an opportunity without any cost for taxpayers to really revolutionize and change the current ecosystem. Unfortunately, it's already, I think, more than 2 years that we have been discussing this, and it has yet not happened. So I would encourage many of the governments to really support that specific element to make it happen, because it can make a huge difference in terms of investments in development.
And do you think having that clause is enough to push that forward, given that it hasn't in 2 years?
I think it's political will. I think we need a couple of leaders who really bring it to the closing line, yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Álvaro. Thanks for making the time to be with us.
Thank you for having me.